Welcome back to the 100th Monkey Radio Show. For those of you that aren't members and you're listening to this, we decided to make this one free. So, because me and Tom both think this information is just vital.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, there's tons and tons of people out there that are sharing information about consciousness and spirituality and raising your vibration and that 100th monkey syndrome. So, but this type of material, it's not as widespread, especially coming from this different perspective, and we think it's important to raise the awareness of this. So we're not going to put this behind any walls.
So we left off at credit score, and I was gonna say the example that you mentioned to us because we were chatting yesterday to kind of overview what we were gonna discuss, and you mentioned the difference between the 19-year-old kid who can't get any credit cards or any loans versus the 45-year-old man who's been working and makes what, 200K, 300K.
Right. We'll get to that.
Okay. So I'm skipping ahead again.
Yeah, a little bit. And you mentioned something about this. This is something that's not very widespread. This is my own pure research. A lot of what I've found in terms of bills of exchange, negotiable instruments, and merchant law is all out and information available on the internet or books or wherever. And so is those documentaries on banking. And ultimately, at the end of this hour, we're going to be talking about how people can utilize this information to help them resolve debt. And a lot of that information is out there on the internet, and it's available. But what I'm getting at right here in this transition from gold and away from gold in the property, in the system, and that we never lost property is my own pure research. So talk about it's not out there. You guys are the first ones to get it out there, except for a couple little talks that people have happened to record, like Sun, over in Hawaii.
Yeah.
He's had his camera on me a few times, but it hasn't really, it hasn't been deliberately spread.
I wonder why.
Right. Well, and I don't really look to be in the spotlight on this kind of stuff. And Tom knows he kind of had to chase me down a little bit to get me in front of the camera. But I'm warming up.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, this perspective, I think it's very important for people to be able to understand the foundational things behind our system right now, because without a solid foundation, your building's not going to stand very long. So,
you got it.
Understanding the basis is vital. And a lot of these other systems that are out there, wipe your debt away and all the, mortgages and all that crap. There's some good systems out there, and I'm not knocking any of them, but they don't really change. They don't really do a whole lot for completely changing and the understanding of the system that we're under. I mean, they do some to a certain extent, but I think that there are chinks in the foundation there. So.
For sure, and they're nice segues to start learning and people to take their own responsibility for their own commercial affairs instead of going to the banker to ask permission. What may or may not I do with my mortgage? What can go into the credit card companies and asking customer service, what can I do? Yeah, those programs, Tom, that you're talking about are they're a great segue and introduction into starting to take control of your commercial affairs, for sure. But that's what they are. They're a start to it.
Right.
Here's something else too: is that if people have been using money since they were kids, and so they have a picture painted in their mind of what it is, what that entire picture looks like in their mind. And so as you're listening to some of this newer commercial process, newer commercial considerations, it's very difficult to take those and figuratively, if those were like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, if you try to force new pieces into your picture, it's difficult to find how they fit, and it's difficult to learn. And so if you start to learn money and commerce and commercial process as if you're starting a new picture, it takes a while before an image starts to develop, and it's very unnerving for people to just collect data without seeing what that picture is. And there's some time to it, and that's one of the other prohibitive things, elements to learning this is it takes a certain firmness of mind or certainty that there's light at the end of the tunnel kind of a thing before you start doing this.
Right. You know, I see this stuff as a major stepping stone for getting past the society that we're in and moving towards the cashless society, moving towards a different paradigm for us.
You know, some of those words might be too much for some people to take in and digest right away, so maybe don't get caught up in it.
Right.
But it's there to be had. And so if one of the things we need to know is where are we at now before we can move ahead. And so I think when you see how the banking system works from the very highest level, and I don't mean the president of your local credit union. I'm talking about the big boys in the Federal Reserve. We're talking about understanding money from the perspective of the Bank of England and the Vatican. That's the kind of view of money that this encompasses. And when you have the understanding of the system, it becomes kind of like a board game, and it's not that difficult. It's not. So let's pick that pace back up at the credit score.
Yeah.
And the credit score at a point in time of, let's say, the late 1930s or the 1940s, because that's when it was still fairly immature. It was still it was established, but it wasn't developed to the sophistication that it's at now. And its starting point, its cornerstone was to measure property as labor. And so if we were to jump ahead, now we see that a credit score has all kinds of secondary and tertiary considerations like asset to debt ratio. And so some of those assets and things don't directly measure labor and property, but that's okay. They just got it folded in and incorporated later. Are you guys still there? It went quiet.
Yeah. I'm still here.
Okay.
We're listening.
Okay. It was eerily quiet. I thought maybe I lost the connection.
You know, real quick here, I think we're going to pause for a second, guys, and pick right back up. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I had a little hiccup with the Skype, and we are back up and running.
Where we leave it off, maybe some of the credit score stuff, huh?
Right.
And so certainly it wasn't as sophisticated then as it is now. And so now some of the credit score now encompasses things like assets to debt ratio or asset to income ratio. I don't know what some of those ratios are, but they include current assets, and that's not labor as property. And so there are some secondary considerations that just go beyond the scope of measuring property, but that's always been the cornerstone of the system. That's what we're doing, is we're measuring property. Now, when you go and you fill out a credit application, let's say at a bank, and you're 18 years old, this is kind of what Ramon was getting at earlier, is it's so tough to get credit when you're 18, 19 years old, 20 years old. And maybe you think back and you're going, man, I'm getting paid great. I don't know why it is that I can't get credit. I am good for this loan. And so on the other end of the spectrum, if you were to picture a guy that he's fairly high up in the corporate world and he's making a couple $100,000, or he's a dentist, or he's a professional like on par of an attorney's salary, right? Where they're fairly well and stable into six figures. and they're 45 years old, those guys have credit issuers chasing them like parasites, right? They're just falling all over themselves as far as these financial institutions trying to get these guys to fill out credit reports and that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, what happens is whenever you fill out a credit report, a credit application, and you give them all the pertinent information, including the social security number, these big boys on the inside, they know how to go monetize that instrument, and property is released out of Treasury based off of your birth certificate and the property you're putting out, and you never knew it was released. You had no idea it was going on behind the scenes. And so, and that right there is something that a lot of researchers have found out, and that's part of the secret that's not unheard of. That's becoming fairly well known. It's just that the people think that their signature is the money, that's the credit. Therein lies some very deep confusion as to what it is, and that gets monetized, and why does it get monetized. And that's called accepted for value method, or in shorthand in the lingo in some of the forums is called A for V, letter A, number 4, letter V, A for V. And it is a very legitimate method of handling commerce. It's just that there's a lot of confusion as to why it works.
Can we go into just a little bit into the A for V?
Yeah, let me lay out how banking works, and so that we can pull in. A for V is a methodology that private people outside of the banking world have kind of figured out those tricks. So let's see what current conventional is as far as what the bank does, and then when we transition over to people using that current system for their own needs, it's a little smoother transition.
Right. Sounds good.
Yeah. So let's do a hypothetical bank loan for someone that, let's say they're 45 years old and they're a professional, and they have their credit, at least as far as how it's reflected in their credit score, very favorable to them, and they want a bank loan for a mortgage, second mortgage for $250,000. What they do is when they go to the bank, the first step one is, hey, let's get our hands on that. The bank's going to want to get their hands on that social security number, so that they can look into your property, your measurement. Let's go see what it is that you're worth, and they're like a gatekeeper, right? They're gonna assess the value of your own credit that you can tap into. It's your own credit. They're just gonna figuratively step into a master-servant relationship. They're going to be the master, and they're going to tell you how much of your own credit you can get into. And it's kind of like a parent that has a kid save his allowance but doesn't let him spend it all. Right? It's the kid's own money, but the parent tells them how much they can get into. That's what's going on. That's what's going on here. So when you fill out, let's say that your credit score is favorable to
850.
Well, let's go 250. Just so I don't lose track of the numbers. That's the number I have in my mind for this conversation. It's not real critical. But they get a loan for $250,000, and so whatever that instrument is, ultimately that has the borrower's signature, that instrument figuratively goes out the back door of the bank, right? It leaves the bank and it goes to Treasury. And Treasury receives that instrument. And let's say it's a Bank of America loan. There's folks inside Treasury that deal with Bank of America daily. And they know that, hey, if we get something like this from Bank of America, all the gatekeepers have done their job. In other words, the amount of your allowance that you can tap into has been approved by someone for the $250,000, and Treasury does not reapply judgment to the scenario to find out if indeed that is appropriate or ideal or whatever. There's no judgment applied to it. What they know is that if they get something like this from Bank of America, all that work is done. all they do is send a wire transfer, an electronic wire transfer called FedWire, and they send a currency transfer that's digital back to that Bank of America branch where you were at. Now, between the time that you filled out that credit application and before the wire transfer comes back, that Bank of America branch or somewhere inside a corporate established a bank account under your Social Security number, and you didn't know about it. And that wire transfer then lands in that account. It lands in your account. That was your credit, and it's your account. But they don't tell you that. And here's where that wire transfer does not go. It does not go to a general slush fund inside a Bank of America that then gets redivvied up. That's not what's going on. It doesn't go into the big gas tank and then you get a gallon. It goes right into your account, your specific little account that they opened up for you. And then what they do? They call you up and they say, "Hey, your loan's here." And if that's not a slap in the face that those guys just laugh themselves right to their little private islands, I don't know what is. But it gets better. It gets better in terms of the story, and it gets worse as far as the people goes. So you go in and let's just say, I said this was a second mortgage. If we were to keep that concept at the first mortgage concept, I can show you where that gets really interesting. And then then Ramon, we'll transition over to how people can kind of utilize this for themselves, or if people already know about A for B, here's what this does: is that this is telling them where the property is and why it is that the system works. Right? If you already got your mind around it, it's the property, it's your labor that's out there and being measured and tracked by your credit scores. That's the backing on the currency. Anyway, so $250,000. It's a current mortgage. If you default on that mortgage, first of all, at some point the bank bundled and sold the debt already, right? So it didn't cost them a dime, and you were paying on that thing for, let's say, 5 years. That was pure profit. Now, they had administrative costs, but it didn't cost them anything for the currency. The inventory itself was straight up free. And anybody that works in retail knows it's a really good gig if you can get all of your inventory for free. And all you have to do is pay your overhead. That's a good gig. That's what's going on in the banking world. So then they bundle and sell the debt, let's say. And so they get a nice chunk off of that $250,000 plus whatever it is that you were paying them. When you go into foreclosure and they take the home back, they then got all of that profit up front, and then they receive the home free and clear. And then they resell it. And so there's the mechanism that you can extrapolate into why credit gets pulled back, and then it becomes flush again, and they put too much out there, and they make it, when all those people were getting loans that if you look at it through a conventional lens, there were people that were getting loans that should not have been able to do it. They shouldn't have been able. Well, BS. Those loans were all paid for up front. What the bank was doing is they knew for a fact that all they had to do was aggregate in the big picture, just pump out as much credit as possible, because ultimately what they have in mind is to repossess homes.
So that's why, for example, before the whole housing bubble burst in, what was that, 2008? A lot of people were getting the houses like interest only mortgages,
right?
Where for like, anywhere from like 2 years to 5 years, they were paying only on the interest.
Yeah, balloon payments and stuff. Yeah, there was all kinds of ridiculous programs out there, and it didn't matter. It was all marketing. It was all marketing. It was just anything they could do to get people to take out a loan is what it was. That's why there were so many different programs.
Yeah.
So it sounds like some people in the banking system didn't actually understand what real property was initially, except for maybe some real high guys, and then some lower down the totem pole guys started figuring this out, and that's when they went for broke and decided, ooh, we can get their money. It's not our money. There's no risk involved. Let's take it.
Right. Well, I mean, what are some of the systems in place right now that where they're the insiders and they know the rules of the game? I mean, who are those guys? They're not trained purely superficially as we would see it from the outside through the banking system, right? I mean,
right.
Some of this knowledge is passed down through. You get high enough up into the Masons, and these guys know damn well that there's the secret club where now within a Masonic system, and you're high enough up, and you're you're also a super high banker. Your buddies are the other high executive, but the inside group is going to be an executive banker that's also a high Mason, a high degree Mason, right?
Right.
These are now we're starting to work with some combinations of how the rules the rules of the game are played so tight. Because it's been bantered around in this circle that the level of banker that even begins to comprehend what's called the private exemption, in other words, where the currency comes from, is on an executive vice president level minimum. That's the lowest guy on the totem pole on a need-to-know basis. That is a select handful of people that actually get it. And so look at the kind of currency that would pour out into the system if everybody, when your loan is that's not a loan that got transferred from existing currency. That's another thing to get your mind around. Is that $250,000 loan did not exist before the loan, right? And so if that's the case, every single loan that was put into the system is such an influx of currency into the economy that it would flood. And so there's got to be a way to drain the back end, right? So the bathtub doesn't overfill.
Right.
IRS, look how high income tax is. What do people pay for taxes total? 40%, 50%? Right? I mean, I don't know what, I can't really intelligently speculate what the average person in the U.S. pays on income tax, or all the taxes total, but it's...
My sister was paying on her house. She lost it during the bubble crisis, but the house was $450, and she was paying $10,000 a year on income tax.
But income, you combined a house and income tax. So income tax is typically for wages.
Okay.
Do you mean property tax on the land?
Property tax on the land.
Okay, and look at all the other hidden taxes that are out there too, like whatever's already incorporated into luxury items like alcohol,
gas,
fuel tax. Yep. Utilities probably has some built-in taxes that it's not even a line item on your bill.
Does everything's taxed.
Right, and so all those taxes are what I'm saying. Hey, look at those are really drains. There's kind of the balance. Here's something else too that I don't know that I'm going to find a smooth segue into it, but every single penny that is paid in federal income tax does not go to any of the infrastructure. That's purely the debt on the money that's borrowed by the United States. Now, that money and the introduction of currency that way is a secondary system to what I'm talking about, right? So what I'm saying right now is signatures and agreements on these loans is one method of currency introduction. There's an entirely secondary system, which is the United States, and I scratched the surface on that earlier, borrows money into existence, and therein lies the national debt. And so when you use conventional currency, you go out and you receive it through labor or trade or sales or whatever. Every time you use that, there's a whole other system there that needs to get analyzed before we can. There's a third system that needs to get analyzed before we really see the big picture of what's going on here. So one is the gold and silver system to compare it. 2 is how we introduce currency into the system, and then the third is how the United States borrows it and introduces it into the system. So back to that $250,000 mortgage. You know, Ramon, you said something about your sister and her home, and she lost it. My question specifically on that is, and this is what a lot of people need to know, is did she lose? Was that a foreclosure? Or did she do a short sale?
She tried the short sale and it foreclosed before she was able to short sale.
God, perfect for her. I'll tell you why. If you do a short sale, then you contract back out of any remedies that might have happened in a foreclosure. And a foreclosure always happens on a mortgage. So mortgage, when you look at that word mort engage, mort means death or dead, right? Like a mortuary or a mortician.
Yeah.
So the question is, what died? And the answer is the title. The title died. And so anybody that transfers any element of ownership into that home that your sister now has always has inferior title. And there's a maxim of law that says once a mortgage, always a mortgage. In other words, your sister has the right of redemption at any point in time in the future that she wants because she still has title to that house. And that's what's going on to an epidemic degree. And that's what I've been doing. That's what I work on. And so that's what's got me to understand the nature and character of money so well, is because this is what I do, is I'm trying to undo all of those undo those foreclosures. And short sales, I don't know of a way to do it because the people get signed away their rights to redeem the mortgage, but if you lose it in a foreclosure, you can get it back. And the system doesn't like it, and it's difficult, and that's probably show number 5. But it's probably
Okay, everybody write that down. Show number 5, segment 5.
Just winged it. I don't know if it's going to be 5 now. I don't want to have to do that much.
Hey, you said it, not me.
All right. So let's just stick with how the nature of money and currency works. So now that we have the system down for how a bank conventionally functions and how they derive the currency that gets passed to you, what a lot of people are starting to figure out is that the bills that they receive for a mortgage or a credit card or student loans, any corporate debt, the bill that you receive is actually the money to pay it with. And so right there, I misused the term money. And so what I meant is that's the currency to pay it with. And money properly is gold or silver. It's the intrinsic value incorporated into the medium of exchange as well. And everything else needs to have its own proper terminology. And so that might be currency or funds or cash. Cash can be banknotes that aren't necessarily the property itself. So
Hello?
have you guys? Yeah. You still there, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I lost you.
Yeah, it went silent for me too.
Yeah, I'm muted for a second there.
Okay. Do you know, have you guys ever seen a dollar sign with a single stripe? With a single line through the S?
Mm-mm.
Just
I have not.
No.
A single line.
It's what's on my keyboard, though, for the computer.
That's what I'm getting at. A single line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a dollar sign with 2 strikes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's old-fashioned, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not current. A dollar sign with 2 strikes, it's called a cifrao, CIFRAO, and it means real. And a dollar sign with a single strike is the symbol for a bill of exchange or commercial paper or representative of money.
So, for example, if I have gold or silver,
Yeah.
that's the 2 lines.
You got it.
And if And if I have like let's say 1,000 yen, which is like $10,
Yeah.
that's a single line. Okay.
You got it.
But so what if I'm referring to my the funds that I have in the Treasury? That would be real property, correct?
It would. And so to speak on that very quickly is the system has been so mutilated. We're now in uncharted territory, and I would say it's conceivable that we don't have the right dollar sign for that. That might have to be a three-strike dollar sign, or something else might need to come out of that. And my point is, the system has very much relied on the single-strike dollar sign, right? That's always representative money, because people, by and large, have not known how to tap into their own credit. Now, I say by and large. There's stories of guys doing FOIA requests to Treasury on their file and seeing all kinds of crazy stuff, like oil sheiks using their account and seeing billions of dollars transfer through. There are people, there are insiders that know how to use these accounts. But they're an account. It's not a money account. There's no money already there. So we got to get that out of our mind and suspend judgment before we really fully understand what's going on with those accounts. That might be a future show. I don't think we can touch on that today.
Right.
Okay.
But my point was that double strike dollar sign. And so there are people that are starting to figure out, hey, when I get these bills, all I have to do is to properly accept them. And therein lies that language, accepted for value. And I'm not going to get into what the procedure is, but they'll send that either through the IRS or to Treasury, and they will wire transfer FedWire back over to the creditor. And so if the IRS themselves is the creditor, there's different techniques. And real quick, if anybody wants to go verify this is codified as far as how this procedure works in 31 USC 5118.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's very short. And I don't have it open right now. Let me go pull it up here.
31 USC 5118.
Right.
31 UFC 5518.
5118.
Yes. Tom's correct. And it's called the gold clause in consent to use. And there's a lot of extra words in there that are completely irrelevant to me. But the words that I've focused on and that I have seen that identified in this system is under lowercase b. It reads, the United States government may not pay out any gold coin. So pause right there. If anybody that's familiar with the bankruptcy process, an insolvent entity doesn't have the right or power to handle its own assets. It has to be sent into a trustee for somebody else to do it. Right there you can read between the lines. It says the United States may not pay out in any gold coin. They cannot deal directly in property, in that kind of property, because they're insolvent, they're bankrupt. But anyway, it says, following that, it says a person lawfully holding United States coins and currency may present the coins and currency to the Secretary of the Treasury for exchange, dollar for dollar, for other United States coins and currency that may be lawfully held. And so what is the Treasury doing? Are they breaking up $100 bills into 20s so that you can go to the casino? I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous to think that they're just making small change here. Why else would they exchange dollar for other currency? What's going on here? Well, here's what's going on is they'll take anything that is currency. And so now we have to go back and say, what the hell's currency? And look that up and define it. And there's a little bit of research, but not much. I mean, we're talking the education level of your average junior high kid. If he goes and looks up, well, what does currency mean? and then see the substantial meaning within currency and go look those words up, you know how to chase out the meaning a little bit. You'll see that pretty quickly they'll pretty much take anything in exchange, dollar for dollar, for other currency that may be lawfully held. So what the United States is not, they're not sending back out anything tangible. They're sending out wire transfers. And so when you get a bill and it ultimately ends up at Treasury, with the intent to do a set-off, they send out a wire transfer through that statute to the creditor. That's it right there. And so there's ways to, there are divisions within the IRS that will ultimately get that over to Treasury as well. Treasury is oversight for the IRS. But IRS is mostly a debt collector, a third-party debt collector, and they're a registered corporation in Puerto Rico. Yeah. For people that like to do a little research, you can go search that out for yourself. They're not a government agency.
That's funny because I don't know if it has any relationships, but Puerto Rico is bankrupt right now.
Sure they are.
Yeah, they've been bankrupt for a while.
Yeah, they don't use gold. So, Ramon, you know what the IRS stands for?
Internal Revenue
Service.
Thank you.
Again, Tom, what is it?
Internal Revenue Service.
You pronounced it wrong too. It's the Internal Revenue Service. Revenue. They're going from one venue to another. They take your private property asset, they take it out of the private venue and put it into the public. They are revenuing currency.
The Revenue Service.
Yep. Just like we don't say today, we kind of slur it to today.
Right.
You know, its pronunciation has certainly been slurred. Yeah, it's revenue. They're revenuing. Keyword there is venue.
Yeah, look at that.
So, a lot of these guys, when they're doing this set-off procedure, they're sending in bills and whatnot into the United States, presentments, and I'm going to expand on that in a little bit. And the U.S. sends out currency to the creditor, whether it's a mortgage or a credit card or student loans. And that system, here's another way. Let me explain a couple of scenarios this way. If you go to a bar that's big enough to where they're so busy that the bartenders don't have time to be scrutinizing the age, getting ID from the people coming in to make sure they're old enough, to make sure they're over 21. A lot of times those places will have somebody at the door, and he's just checking ID to make sure that everybody's 21, and everybody that gets past him is good to go inside the bar. And when you go up to a bartender, the bartender just knows. He just knows. It's just a presumption that you're over 21 because you got in, right? It's not part of his thought process to critique whether or not you have the credentials to be inside because there's somebody else that does that job. That is like how the Treasury works. When people started doing these A for Vs, Treasury is like the bartender, and they're just releasing property as they're instructed, and they don't check into credentials. They're not looking into it. That job is with the bartender analogy, that job is done with the guy at the door, the gatekeeper. Well, the gatekeeper in this system is the bank and the credit score. And so when people started to bypass this system, what that does is now currency is being introduced into the economy, and there's no debt associated with it. Therefore, there's no interest to be paid on it. And so, did you guys ever hear some of the scuttle and rumor and kind of thing about the intent of the bankers to crash the dollar and introduce the Amero?
Right.
Yeah.
And it never happened, right? Did you hear the Amero? That concept just dried up because the system couldn't crash itself.
what I did hear was from two bankers, two Japanese bankers. I asked them about it, and what they said is that that currency is used between banks to trade, to trade currency. That according to those two bankers, they trade Amero between the banks in Canada, Mexico, and United States.
Yep.
But that's not for public use.
You got it, and it won't be public use, and it's going to dry up. And so that was an attempt to have something of the system turnkey and ready to go. So when the system crashed, that Amero was just ready to be introduced, and they weren't allowed to get that far, and the progress was halted because of all these people doing accepted for value, and they were actually, for the first time since 1933, paying their bills with property. Because prior to that, what they were doing was called a novation. And I'm not going to get into novation at all for this conversation, but a novation is when you swap out an element of a debt. And so you can swap out a new creditor, say, hey, listen, Ramon, you owe me $100, but I'm gonna assign that debt over to Tom. Or Ramon, you owe me $100, and between the two of us, you don't have the cash, but you end up trading me a watch to extinguish the debt. That's called a novation. So that's
Okay.
what happens when we use borrowed currency. When the United States borrows money into existence, and now this takes some time and study and some concentration, and I'm going to explain this way faster than you'll probably, if you're new to this, readily conceive of what's going on. But when I use a borrowed dollar and I try to purchase something with it, I couldn't buy anything with it. I could only purchase it. And so what I did is I was off the hook for the liability, but the United States is still on the hook. There's still a debt out there associated somehow. And so when people started to use the accepted for value method or the set-off method, bills were starting to be paid for the first time since 1933. To be paid and not novated. They were actually being the contract was actually being discharged.
Okay, let me see if I understand this correctly. So let's use very low numbers.
Sure.
So let's say I want to buy a hamburger,
Yeah.
and I don't have the cash. So instead of going to Tom, so Tom can borrow the money from you, I just go directly to you, and then you buy me the hamburger, and then later I pay you without paying any interest, or I don't have to pay you at all.
Well,
The A for
you kind of lost me with who the parties were. Instead of saying me and Tom, who was I compared to Tom? Was I the vendor or Treasury?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're the Treasury, and Tom's the bank.
I got you. Okay. Can you do it again? Will you do this? Run the scenario by me again.
Okay, so I want to buy a hamburger, and it costs $10.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have the money. So
Right.
instead of me going to Tom, as usual, to borrow the money,
Yeah.
I just go directly to you because Tom borrows the money from you
Perfect.
to lend it to me.
I got it. No,
Okay.
that won't work. But it won't work, and yet I think by and large, 99% you understand the method correctly. And here's what it doesn't do: is this method does not go out into the future. What it does is it only works historically like an insurance claim. You can't go to your insurance agent and say, hey, listen, I have this insurance account, and I'd like for you to liquidate $5,000 out of it. He'd look at you like you were crazy, and if you asked him that, you might be. And so what I'm suggesting is when a bill comes due, that's a contract that needs to be executed. And so what that's evidence of is an agreement and a contract, and that half of the parties have come through. Whether it's a utility bill, they've provided utilities. Whether it's a mortgage, they've provided their end of it. And so now what they're looking to do is to complete the contract and have the debtor now come through with his side. And when it comes to debts that are asking for a single strike dollar sign, which all of them are, all they're asking for is for you to adjust their books. They're not asking you to go out and get and labor for banknotes, and I'll explain how that little scenario works in a second. They just need help adjusting their account. They just need some currency to land in their account to adjust it. And so all that works historically. And so when you get a bill, it's the equivalent of an insurance claim. And it needs to get settled. It needs to get adjusted. You can't go out into the future and buy something like you just did with that hamburger. It's got to be done at a pace and rhythm where you've already produced the amount of labor. You've already been measured for your ability to repay it. And so this system works historically. Even though it's called a prepaid system, you can't go nuts with it and start pulling out hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. No, it does not work that way. In other words, even though a hamburger is a very low value, it looks to the future. That's not how the system works.
Okay.
It's all based on existing debt.
Existing debt, and yep. So here's another little analogy. Let's just say I own a dry cleaner, and Tom, you bring some blankets to me, and you drop them off, and I say, okay, well, these are a bunch of wool blankets. It's going to take longer than the typical wait time. You got to come back in a couple of weeks to pick them up, and I give you claim tickets for those blankets. Those claim tickets are going to look substantially different at each separate dry cleaner across the country, aren't they?
Right.
There's not going to be the kind of uniformity that you see with United States dollars. In other words, a dollar in Florida is going to look identical to something up in Seattle, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's not the case with the dry cleaners. Well, that's how banking used to work in the 1800s. All of the banknotes were different at every bank location or every chain maybe. And that's some of the misunderstanding and disinformation that was put into the system, was that they needed to inject uniformity into the system because each bank was different. Well, here's how each bank worked. It worked like a little mom and pop dry cleaner. When you came in and dropped off your gold coin for safekeeping, what the banker did is he gave you a receipt for that gold that was dropped off there. And those were banknotes. Those were tough bond paper. They were probably made out of cotton and hemp, and that's what was going on. And that's why that guy's banknotes look different than his competitor across town.
So you can't go over there and get gold because you never dropped anything off there.
Right. You didn't drop anything off over there, so you can't go claim them there.
Okay.
But let's take that dry cleaner scenario back over to the modern day. Now that we're getting a little bit of a picture painted here, when a creditor comes to you, let's say it's a student loan, and they're saying, "Hey, look, you owe $50,000 for this," and people, when they first get their mind around accepted for value, they think the bill cannot possibly be the money. That's not money. I can't envision that. There's no way I can just send the bill into Treasury and it pays it. Their modesty has been so established by the system that where we value ourselves compared to somebody else by how much we've made of ourselves, and on all these sort of cultural concepts that have been put on us, it keeps us from actually being able to perceive this. Well, that scenario is exactly like Tom dropping off his property at the dry cleaners. And let's say that my dry cleaner location is a half an hour from Tom's home, and he shows up a couple weeks later to claim those blankets, to get those wool blankets. And he says, "Oh man, I forgot my claim tickets." Well, we know he's got a right to those things. That's his property. The claim tickets are inconsequential in the equation. There's no real value in them. They're just information to exchange so that he can get those blankets. And so let's say he calls home, and someone at his home is there, and they answer the phone, and he says, "Hey, I got a bunch of dry cleaner claim tickets under a magnet on the refrigerator. Can you read me those numbers, account numbers?" And so he writes them on the back of a business card. And he comes into my dry cleaner, and he says, "Hey, listen, I want to pick up those blankets." And I recognize the guy. I know it's his property. And he says, but I don't have my claim tickets. And I say, hey, man, my warehouse is so big back there, I have no idea which ones are yours and how not to get them confused. And am I giving you ones that have been already cleaned? And I won't know how to hook you up with the right stuff. And Tom says, no problem. Check it out. On the back of this business card, I wrote down the numbers. I'm not going to care at all, right, that there's no value in that business card. I'm not going to care at all that it's not exactly the claim tickets. And so let's skip back over to someone needing to claim property to get it to pay off their student loans. That the student loan bill that you send into Treasury with all the appropriate writing on it is identical to the business card. It doesn't matter the exact piece of paper that we use. All we need to do is to be able to connect the appropriate man to the right creditor through the right account. We need to release the right property. In other words, we need to get the right blankets out of Treasury so that we don't take somebody else's. And we know who the creditor is. It's the university, or maybe it's a financial institution that was doing the accounting. So we got that done. It doesn't. That's why it doesn't matter what medium of exchange you use. You can write it on a bill. You can write it. You can make your own promissory note. You can write up anything. If you get a letter from a creditor, you can use that. It's not even a notice. It doesn't have bank accounts and transfer numbers or wiring or account numbers, routing numbers. It doesn't matter what it is that you communicate to Treasury with, as long as it has the right data on it. But the downside is we're so accustomed to, if we don't see something that was pre-made for us, like a money order from the post office, or a check that is not counterfeited, or if we don't see legitimate United States bank notes, right, Federal Reserve notes, if we don't see those, we're at a loss. That's the only thing we've been trained to identify as money. And yet, ironically, that's not money. Those are just claim tickets to the property. I don't know if unless you know it.
Yeah, this is definitely starting to paint a better picture in my mind.
Yeah, so my promissory notes are only claim tickets.
Right. It's not money itself, it's not the property. And yet when we understand money and property historically, this new current system doesn't fit precisely as a template over the top of it. In other words, money doesn't actually circulate anymore. The value, the intrinsic value, the property itself is not what's handed over. And so, but that's fine. As a matter of fact, it's better than fine, because if we keep moving forward and everyone learns how to use this system, it's an incredible system to use as a transitional system to cashless, to moneyless. Because now if all anybody ever has to do is accept their bill and send it into Treasury, and Treasury gets a wire transfer, at some point, once people have their mind around that, and a lot of people do have their minds around A for B. People have been doing this for 10 years. And so once a bigger and bigger portion of the population catches on, at some point when this is the cultural norm, people are going to scratch their head and saying, what are we even doing this for? You know, if all we need to do is to go out and execute a contract, and what was all this money all about? You know what I'm saying? It's the system can evolve quickly into just a signature, and off we move, and the property's already there. And now here's what's not going on, is the system is not artificially using money as a commodity to restrict its volume. Money will always be equally available to labor. It's always there. Because right now, when there's a scarcity of money, there's companies that say, we would hire, but there's not enough money, right? I would go do this, but there's not enough money. People are willing to work, but there's not enough money. Well, that artificial lack is built into the system by ignorance, because people don't know about the Treasury and the set-off and the private exemption accounts. And so people's view of scarcity and abundance has been substantially artificially skewed through that. because people have just been told that money doesn't grow on trees. Well, it didn't back when it was gold, and it does now.
Mm-hmm.
It does now. And so I don't question this system at all, because I've been doing it for quite a while, and I do it for more people than myself. So I've seen this happen a lot. And I don't want to get into it now, but I have some firsthand stories of doing this and success with dealing with taxes, with mortgages, with auto loans, as far as big stuff, credit cards. Yeah, this is what keeps me busy. Probably, I don't know, 10 hours a day. And at some point, Tom, if we ever talk long enough on this and you guys record it, there's quite a little story that's completely unknown in the mortgage world. It's as unfamiliar to people as money. And it's all good news. In other words, the remedy that's in the people's hands is it's all there. It's not on the corporate side. It's not what the banks will allow. It's not whatever your attorney can go fight for. The power in the individual people to go get their homes back and to have mortgages free and clear is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable.
We'll definitely get there.
Because we have listeners in other countries, what would be your suggestion? Because you said anything that would be in the UN would be the same, or would it be slightly different, or you have no clue?
None of the above. The United States Treasury, well, there's code so I haven't had to spend a lot of time looking into this, but I know it's there, and I'd have to go study it for maybe a day or so. But there are statutory provisions that guide the U.S. Treasury for them to negotiate international currency and turn it into a wire transfer in the same way that I read out earlier for international bills of exchange. And so one of the stipulations is it has to be at least $10,000. But what I'm highly suspicious of, and just short of knowledge, in other words, what I believe. When I say the word believe, it means that it's a strong instinct, but I don't have knowledge from research. Is what I believe is that Treasury will monetize and send a wire transfer out to any UN, to any bank that's in a UN country, and so that.
Well, it is the World Monetary Fund.
Yeah. So and I don't.
But I was wondering more, like, if I was, let's say, I get a bill here in Japan, and I send it to the Japanese Treasury Department.
No, that's what I'm saying is you don't do that. You do send it to the U.S. Treasury, and they send it directly to your local creditor. You don't use your central bank in that country. But let me retract that. It's not that you don't. It's one, I don't know how the international systems work, but I do know that the United States Treasury does volunteer to pay those bills. And so I don't know if that's in addition to foreign countries doing it or in lieu of. I don't know. I do know that they do it. They do say, hey, anything over $10,000 internationally, we'll monetize those as well. My guess is that's a system that's just been for use for the inside good old boys that are kind of running in the financial circles of everybody's got their own private island kind of thing, right? You know, you got 200-foot yacht and so many homes you can't keep track of. That's the kind of circles that would know how to use that internationally. And right now, to me, those are strong suspicions, and I don't have the exact United States codes, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the range of 31 USC 5300, somewhere in there, somewhere in Title 31.
31 UFC 550.
No, yeah, 5300.
5300.
Yeah, or bigger. I mean, it's somewhere in the next subtitles after that is where it is in U.S. code. But here now, we probably ought to mention in this particular conversation before it gets buried somewhere else, is that when people started to figure out that their own private exemption and this kind of thing, how it works, and hey, the banks we can bypass them. The system was kicking sand in those people's face like crazy. Guys were going to jail, and they were getting charged with all kinds of nonsense. There's one guy that got so good at this kind of stuff and in courtroom procedure that they just flat out declared him insane, not mentally competent, so that they can throw him in jail so that he didn't have the right to be heard for it. He didn't have the right to speak for himself.
Wow.
He got so good at this that, I mean, so here's what I'm saying is when you start finding out these kind of secrets, the banks don't take it lightly. You get charged with all fraud and the system is designed to scare you right off of trying this stuff unless you have become very proficient at, and not law, not banking, not money, at thinking and critical thinking for yourself. Because if you can see through the claims where the system says, hey, that's all fraudulent, you can see how unsound that reasoning is and those accusations are. You know, so the people that can think for themselves and don't rely on the other people ridiculing them or having their opinions sway in the breeze, they're the ones that'll be able to.
This is all ties into, you know, sovereignty. I mean, this is financial sovereignty. This is and I mean, another parallel with the whole spiritual realm, the spiritual sovereignty, the sovereignty of the person, of the being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see. I want to look how close we are to wrapping.
Well, why don't we do this? Well, we've about burned up another hour. Spencer, can we just do a kind of a brief overview of what we've covered here? You know, just a bullet point of what we've covered here in these first couple hours, and yeah, I think this is as good a place as any as to wrap up. But I would like to kind of, if you would, kind of give us a brief rundown of some of the things that we've covered here.
Sure. We went from starting with understanding the nature and character of money, and went back historically and saw where it was in the gold and bills of exchange, and tried to dig a little deeper into the analyzation and see where property was in the monetary system as it has been historically. And we've tried to track where property was through the evolution of the nature of money, to see that property never left the system, and that it only changed form to an abstract concept, and it got hidden very, very compartmentalized, and in order for the system to sort of maintain an autonomous control. And so we kind of looked into that control a little bit through credit scores and some very rudimentary banking procedure, and then kind of evolved into talking about where people can bypass the system's checks and balances as far as the artificial scarcity of currency, so that they can take care of their own bills and pay their own contracts.
Nice.
Okay.
Oh,
so,
go ahead, Ron.
I was just gonna say, so if I want to do this myself, what would be your first suggestion? So, I have a bank loan for a school loan.
Sure.
Or what should be the first thing I do?
The first thing that you...
Or are we going to cover that? Oh, no. Another
No.
segment.
Well, we are, but we need to talk about that. The first thing you need to do is to get proficient in courtroom procedure, because the first thing the system will do, the first thing they'll do is say, this is a fraudulent instrument. We don't know what this is. This is, we consider whatever it was that you sent us frivolous, and they'll put your account into collections. So how are you going to handle that? And therein come, you have to be proficient at the rules of commerce. Now, here's the good news. How many rules do you think there are to commerce? Take a stab. Give me a number.
100.
10.
10.
10.
Wow.
So,
I was thinking in the 300s.
right, and that's kind of why I was setting you up, so that, hey, look, let's not envision something that's insurmountable. So the rules of commerce are very simple. As an example, an unrebutted affidavit stands as truth in commerce. So when you put in an affidavit form, I paid the bill, that forces the other side to rebut your affidavit, right? So what if they don't? There's one of the maxims of commerce is he who leaves the battlefield first loses by default. Your affidavit stands as truth. I paid the bill, and they never came back over the top and said you didn't. And so now you need to know how to keep your claim in commerce if it ends up ultimately going to court. So you ask, what's the first thing to do? You better assume that they're going to kick a bunch of sand in your face. And maybe you know what? What are the odds that the bureaucrats inside these organizations actually even know what it is that you sent them, and that they can monetize it by sending it to Treasury, right? Or that you send them a notice and say, hey, look, I asked Treasury to pay this bill for me, just hang tight. They're going to get pretty upset when people start figuring this out.
And they haven't got an idea of what you're doing.
They don't. They don't know what's going on. And so well, go ahead.
No, I was. I'm a little confused in this part. Whether the bill goes to the debt collector or the bill goes to
Treasury.
When I send it to Treasury.
You got it. Well, and that's very astute, because I haven't brought this up yet. Is when you pay Treasury, who knows how long it's going to take them, that bureaucracy, to actually send the wire transfer. So let's say it's 4, 5, 6 months. How long does it take the IRS to process things sometimes? I mean, it's forever sometimes when it's not the typical, April 15th deadline kind of thing for tax returns.
Yeah.
And so what do you tell your creditor in the meantime when you quit paying? I mean, you see what I mean? There's quite a little story here in actually being able to put this into use. And when they get wind of what you're doing, they'll come and collect the collateral, or they'll send your account straight into collections. And there's ways around that, right? There's always ways around fraud. And so what I would say is, if you're going to do this, it's probably best, because there is something on the line here. Or if there is, I would say. If there's something on the line, then you need to act accordingly and take on as much risk as you have the taste to lose.
Right.
And so probably the wisdom would be to learn the full game, not just the nature of money, and not just see, oh, this is a legitimate system, and go diving into it like a real naive kid. I get a lot of emails from people that are profoundly naive, and they get wind of accepted for value, and they see one of my interviews on the internet, and they say, hey, how do I do this? And I can tell by how poorly what poor questions they ask me, that they're going to be like a train wreck when an attorney sues them for fraud. Right? I mean, their naivety is so extraordinary, that their lack of thinking things through all the way to the end is so profound. I don't even know what to tell those people. But expect resistance in the system. What would happen if you sent this into, a collection agent that's actually an attorney? They're a law firm. What do you think they're going to do when they get something that they don't know how to deal with, or they want to be a shill and a troll in the game, right? These guys are highly trained at, all they do is they don't know that they're taking a fraudulent position. but they're highly trained at taking an adversarial position, and they inadvertently get themselves into trouble. That sometimes these attorneys do. But so you better be able to know how to handle that. And so that's why when you saw in my bio that a lot of this research that I do is conflict resolution, that's where that comes into play.
Right.
So to keep everybody's adversarial positions to a minimum is quite a skill.
Yeah, we've got this is there is so much to this, and you know, there's certain aspects of it that are I see the simplicity of them.
Yep.
But definitely the conflict resolution is probably going to be the biggest one for people to really understand, to be able to put into action.
You got it. And that's why when Tom asked what's the first thing to do, Ramon asked what's the first thing to do, that's where my mind flashed to as well. Let's explore this a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta understand all, like you said, you gotta follow it all the way through, think it all the way through to the end. You gotta understand exactly what you're doing.
You do. But there's light at the end of that tunnel too.
Yeah.
It's there to be had.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if it's too early to ask. Before we go, last question. Do you have any idea what the second segment would be in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I don't know. Here's the deal: is as I explain this, I'm trying to paint a new picture. Maybe if you guys were to go back and listen through it and see maybe what it was that wasn't very clear, and because sometimes I get lost in what I'm trying to say and the ideas that are in my mind.
Yeah.
Versus what I actually articulate for you guys.
Yeah. I got a couple things out already that I think will be a good foundation to start another show with anyway. So
maybe it's just to clarify what it is I'm trying to say here, right. and maybe scratch the surface on. Okay, now let's go back and expand on, and maybe it's just the law merchant law guys and how important contracts were,
right.
And where property is and that kind of thing. And there's quite a little story there.
Yeah.
And then et cetera. Then we just kind of keep moving through these 2 hours over the next few interviews, and we just expand on each segment.
Yep. Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, guys, everybody,
you have your homework.
Out there, I'll tell you what, we've got our homework cut out for us, and I would suggest that you guys refer to those codes that we brought up and read those things to start off with. We'll post some links on the page here, and that's 31 USC 5118 is the one code that we brought up, and I'm also going to post whatever the heck it was called, the thing from 1917.
Oh, right,
where they seized the gold.
Yeah,
the
executive order for seizing the gold.
Right, but there's a lot we can dig into here, guys, and start looking for stuff. We've also posted a couple of other interviews that Spencer has done on YouTube along the page here, so it would be beneficial for you to take a listen to those also. The more you listen to this stuff and you start getting this terminology in your mind, and the better off you are for really understanding it and bringing it from the intellectual knowing to the true heart knowing, the understanding.
Yep.
Spencer, do you have a YouTube channel?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. You guys are kind of catching me first. I've never really put a lot of effort out into educating people on it. I've just been so busy actually doing this that's part of why my presentation is so conversational, and I'm kind of thinking it through as I go, because I more do this than speak on it.
Oh, this is the best type of people to have doing this conversation.
Yeah, might be jumping ahead. I might be jumping ahead by saying this. I'm always jumping ahead, right, Spencer?
Sure. We'll
But
get
with all the information that we'll cover from the segments, I mean, you could just listen back and write a book on this.
yeah.
I'm jumping ahead, right?
You are, and so you know what? At some point, I'm going to show you why it's so difficult to write a book on it. Can I have 90 more seconds to show you?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Let me tell you something about when I mentioned, let's say, handling yourself in the courtroom or whatever. You know, in order to be able to settle some of this stuff, there are some things that don't have a continuous thread related to other concepts, and so there's not a lot of flow. And I'll give you an example. One of the slices of the pie that you need to understand is an example like rights and duties are correlative, and the extent of one is the scope of the other. And so how do you just explain that and then have a smooth segue into and back out of it? And so I just said what it was, but I didn't fully explain what it is that meant. And we don't have time now, but there's so many isolated concepts that don't flow smooth in and out of that.
Right.
I haven't gotten my mind around a good way to, how do you teach somebody the full lay of the land, you know, and what property is, and that'll take you straight into the tables of equity and understanding maxims of equity. It gets it can be some deep water.
Right. Well,
at least
I think, what's that, Ramon?
No, Spencer was saying something. Spencer?
I was just saying a lot of this, maybe it's not so difficult, but it's unrelated to the point where it doesn't have a smooth flow.
Right. Right. Well, that's you never know what the future holds. There might be, that flow might come into you, and you figure out a way to put it down in some articulate and understandable manner. But that's future. So, anyways, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. This has been expanding. That's the word that came to my head. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank you, Spencer, for spending your time with us and sharing your wisdom and knowledge. And anything we can do to continue to raise the awareness and get people to stand on their own 2 feet. We're all for it. So I want to thank everybody again. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance.
The love you deny is the pain you carry.
And we love you guys, and we will see you in the next show.
Amen.